people of this great city, the daring, dashing, determined, devastating fleet commander of the 3rd Fleet.
On behalf of the men who fought in my command, to them and to you, I say, well done. Thank you.
His name is Admiral William Halsey, and this is his biography. I'm Mike Wallace. This is Biography. Our story, Admiral William Halsey. To the men who fought under his command, he was known as Bull Halsey, a rugged, colorful individualist. He was at his best when the odds were stacked against him. In the darkest days of World War II, he issued an order which was to become his personal battle cry and the credo of every American sailor in the South Pacific. When asked for instructions by one of his officers, Halsey radioed, "Hit hard, hit fast, hit often."
All hands, man your battle stations.
The enemy. That is the only way I know how to wage war. He became known as a tough, outspoken leader, and he enjoyed his reputation. It runs in the family, he liked to say. Born in 1882, Bill Halsey is the son of a Navy lieutenant. His earliest recollections are stories his father tells him of adventures at sea. William Sr. is a graduate of Annapolis, and from the beginning he prepares his young son to follow in his footsteps. Growing up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, Bill Halsey wins a local reputation as a scrappy fullback on his school football team. Short and chunky, he makes up in determination what he lacks in size. Years later, as a midshipman at Annapolis, he emerges as a star of the Navy football team. Though he's a head smaller and much lighter than any man on the squad, he says, you can knock them all flat if you hit them hard enough. Graduation day in 1904, Midshipman Halsey ranks 43rd in a class of 62. The Academy's Master-at-Arms tells him, "Good luck, Mr. Halsey, but you'll never make as good an officer as your father." Halsey earns his officer stripe aboard ships of the Great White Fleet, the naval armada that President Theodore Roosevelt sends around the world to display America's potential power. He relishes his new life. There is no experience more exalting to him than steaming the ocean in the company of men who love the sea and the ships they sail. 1918, 35-year-old Commander William Halsey takes command of a destroyer in the Atlantic Fleet. The United States has been drawn into World War I, and Halsey's destroyer is assigned convoy duty, escorting tankers and troop ships through waters infested by German submarines. His first taste of combat comes on April 9th, 1918, off the coast of Ireland. With great satisfaction, he reports, a destroyer skipper's first depth charge is like a girl's first kiss. end of the war, Halsey's record earns him a Navy Cross. The citation reads, "For vigorous and unremitting action against all forms of enemy naval activity." He has had few opportunities to spend extended periods of time with his family. But when he is assigned duty at Annapolis, his wife and 2 children live with him. In the 1930s, the Navy adds a new weapon to its seagoing arsenal, the aircraft carrier. At first sight, Halsey calls them ungainly-looking buckets, something a child started to build and left unfinished. Halsey is amused by the efforts of Navy pilots to master the techniques of carrier landings in these early days. He sees of them, the more intrigued he becomes with the potential of naval air power. The naval officer in the next war, he says finally, had better know his aviation and good. At the age of 52, holding the rank of captain, Bill Halsey takes an extraordinary step. He enrolls as a cadet in the Navy's flying school at Pensacola. With a mixture of outrage and pride, his wife says, the old fool is learning to fly. He can't turn somersaults on the ground, so he's going to turn them in the air. His age and reflexes work against him when he tries to learn combat tactics. I never mastered any stunts that took delicacy, he says, but where you simply kick the plane around, I could usually get by.
I christened the Enterprise.
In 1938, a proud new ship joins the fleet. She is the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise. The flag flying from her mast belongs to William Halsey. In the years to come, the man and the ship will prove to be an unbeatable team. The Big E, as she is called, and her sister ship, the Yorktown, sailed for the Pacific in the spring of 1939. They comprised Carrier Division 2, commanded by Bill Halsey. The carriers, Halsey knows, have revolutionized naval tactics. The day is past when 2 great fleets duel at sea with long-range guns. Carriers can now send off their planes to strike at an enemy hundreds of miles away. As he drills his command, he is aware that if war should come, a whole new book of combat rules must be written. November 28, 1941. The Enterprise sails from Pearl Harbor on what appears to be a routine patrol. She is, however, secretly ferrying planes to reinforce the American garrison on Wake Island. If he had not embarked upon this mission, Admiral William Halsey's ships would have been riding at anchor in Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Halsey's task force steams into Pearl Harbor at dusk on December 7th, 1941. The sight of a shattered fleet is almost too much for Halsey to bear. Except for a brief 9 months during World War I, most of his life has been devoted to a peacetime Navy, to the study of tactics and command procedures. As he surveys the still burning wreckage, the vivid reality of battle is bitterly impressed on his mind and spirit. From this moment, the war will become his personal vendetta. At the age of 59, William Halsey vows, before we're through with them, the Japanese language will be spoken only in hell. In December of 1941, Admiral Chester Nimitz takes command of American naval forces in the Pacific. Nimitz knows he must launch an offensive action. a show of force to rebuild the confidence of his officers and men. It is decided that a carrier task force will raid Japanese bases in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. Only one man has the rank and the experience to lead the mission, Admiral William Halsey. But his men are untried. Intelligence has little or no information on the status of Japanese forces, and the only maps of the islands are outdated. The raid, however, is critically important, and he agrees to take this calculated risk. As Halsey leaves for the Enterprise, Nimitz says quietly, "All sorts of good luck to you." Halsey's task force must depend on surprise for any hope of success. If they are spotted by an enemy scout plane, the mission will end in disaster. A day away from their target, radar reports the presence of an unidentified aircraft. For more than an hour, lookouts watch the sky and listen for the telltale sound of an engine. Finally, the radar men report the plane has veered away from the course the ships are following. Halsey dictates a letter and orders hundreds of copies printed. His pilots will drop his letter along with bombs during the raid. From the American admiral in charge of the striking force to the Japanese admiral on the Marshall Islands, the letter reads, "It is my pleasure to thank you for having your patrol plane not sight my force." As the final preparations for the raid begin, Halsey prowls his ship. As the commanding officer on the eve of his first action, "I knew I should set an example of composure," he says, "but I couldn't." In the early morning hours of February 1st, 1942, Halsey gives the command for the first American offensive naval action of World War II. "Okay," he says, "let 'em go." Time for Halsey. His birds are on the way, and there's nothing he can do except wait.
Bluey here, this is Skyhawk. We're breaking off.
The monitors on board the ship are tuned to the combat frequency used by the Navy pilots.
Roger, Skyhawk. Stay low and good shooting.
Chuck, I'll take the first one in line.
Roger. I'll go in behind you. Down we go.
She's mine.
Someone get those oil tankers. Come on, get those oil tankers.
Look at that baby go up.
I've got me a ship. I've got me a ship. Oh, man, it's burning up a star. Bobby, you okay, Bobby?
One more time, it's going to go under. Got it.
Watch out for bandits. They'll be coming out of the sun.
All right, let's go. Let's warm up and let's get out of here. Let's go home.
The attack is over, and now his boys begin coming back. On the deck of the Enterprise, Halsey counts the returning planes. There were no words, he says, that I wanted to hear more than the air officer's report. "Sir, they all came home." When a staff member asks him, "Isn't it time we got out of here?" Halsey replies, "That's just what I've been thinking." Right then and there, says the Admiral, we formed a club called Haul Out with Halsey. The Japanese, however, recover from their initial surprise and strike back at the Enterprise, the ship that had dared attack them in their own backyard. the first time I was ever under fire, Halsey will recall. I was scared, but my dominant emotion was one of rage. His unique ability to channel his anger into action and to communicate this spirit to his men is the distinguishing characteristic of this fighting admiral. The mission has been successful beyond his hopes, and Halsey celebrates the occasion in the wardroom of the Enterprise. The biggest celebration is reserved for the victorious return of the Big E to Hawaii. News of their success has given the Navy the lift it needed. And as the task force steams into its berths, cheers rock Pearl Harbor. Says Halsey, I cried and was not ashamed. A new legend is born, the Halsey legend. This old sailor is hailed throughout his nation. In tribute to his courage, his daring, his outspoken toughness, the press now calls him Bull Halsey. Halsey is too realistic to be impressed by the extravagant praise, but he can't help boasting just a little. The Pacific Fleet, the big fleet, he declares, has paid its first installment on a bill rung up at Pearl Harbor.
If we do not force an absolute and unconditional surrender, we are sentencing our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to inevitable death in the fight that will come. We must make that nation of beasts so impotent that they never again will be able to rise up.
In the months that follow, Halsey and the Enterprise play their special hit-and-run game against enemy bases. Ranging the Pacific, they run up a remarkable number of successes against the Japanese Navy. Once out of a combat zone, Halsey projects a breezy air of informality that delights his men. One of his proudest achievements is winning the unofficial title of deck tennis doubles champion of the Pacific Fleet. He soon takes on one of his most important assignments. Commander-in-Chief of all forces in the South Pacific. He is directly responsible for the campaign in the Solomon Islands. Says a surprised Halsey, this is the hottest potato they've ever handed me. To the dispirited forces fighting in the malaria-ridden jungles of Guadalcanal, the news is a tonic. Writes one officer, when we heard the old man was coming, we began running around, whooping it up like kids. Such is the legend of Bull Halsey. 1944. The United States forces are on the offensive, pushing the Japanese back toward their homeland. Now, Halsey again takes command of a fighting fleet. His assignment is to support General MacArthur's planned invasion of the Philippines. Halsey receives word that a large task force is steaming south from Japan, determined to annihilate the American forces landing on Leyte. He has waited a long time to meet head-on with an enemy fleet, and he savors this opportunity. He leaves behind him the older, slower ships of the 7th Fleet to guard the beachhead at Leyte. But as he heads north, Halsey learns that elements of a second Japanese armada are converging on Leyte. Hundreds of miles away, the 7th Fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, engages in a running sea battle with the Japanese. The 7th Fleet cannot hold on for long, and a desperate appeal is sent to Halsey. Send help, urgent. In front of Halsey is the opportunity of rendering helpless the main body of the Japanese Navy. Behind him, an American fleet is under savage attack by another but smaller Japanese armada. Halsey must make an agonizing decision. Finally, The knowledge that he must protect the beachhead at Leyte forces him to give up his main chance for breaking the back of the Japanese Navy. Halsey's task force is at sea raiding the Japanese coastline in August of 1945 when word is received that Japan has surrendered. Says Halsey, "This is the proudest day of my life." Halsey is 64 years old, a 4-star admiral who complains, "I have so much gold braid on my sleeve that one more stripe and I won't be able to raise my arm to toast my promotion." And Halsey is usually ready to toast an occasion. "I don't trust a fighting man," he warns, "who doesn't smoke or drink." One of Halsey's offhand remarks comes home to haunt him. He had declared that he wanted the Emperor's famous white horse as a souvenir. In Tokyo, he feels honor-bound to ride the special horse presented to him. But he whispers to a nearby officer, "Don't leave me alone with this thing. I haven't been on a horse in 30 years. Admiral William Halsey leads the advance elements of the returning United States fleet into the harbor at San Francisco. The first of the many tumultuous greetings he will receive in the United States.
One of the most distinguished heroes of America, one of the greatest admirals of all history, the beloved commander of the 3rd United States Fleet, Admiral William F. Halsey. Let us work together as we fought together to guarantee the peace. Only a strong, united America can do that.
These are his last pleasant duties. It's time, he says, that we let the younger men take over the greatest Navy in the world. From time to time, he returns to visit the sites of battle. On a trip to New Zealand in 1956, he recalls fond memories with veterans who served with him in the war.
I hope we'll never have to do anything like that again. But if we do, I hope we're all together again, because we certainly formed a wonderful team that time. I'm sure we could do it again if we had to. But God help us if we ever have to do it again.
This will be the last trip for the aging admiral. On August 16, 1959, at the age of 78, William Halsey is dead. He is accorded tributes from virtually every military leader in the world. But the lasting memorial to this fighting admiral exists in the minds and hearts of the men who served with him. Years after the war, even after his death, when Navy men gather and swap sea stories, the most stirring tales of all are told by the men who can say simply and proudly, "I served with Halsey."